isolate it, hopefully to a certain length of pipe, and then do the fixes sooner rather than waiting until it's totally
Now,
obstructed.
is part of this, so, okay, it's noticed, yeah, it's filled, there's water, there's something not working. Is there a timeline that this needs to be addressed before, do you have, oh, you got 2 weeks to fix it, you have a month to fix it? Or it's, you should look into this and take care of this?
Well, I think the way it's framed in the order right now is that they would have to identify the area that needs repair and report to us,
Okay.
a plan for how long it's gonna take and what they have to do. So it's something at least that we can review. It probably depends on the length of pipe.
Correct, yeah, there's
that
a
they
lot
have
of
to deal with.
unknowns.
One thing we've talked about with the county, with the landfill operator, is that at some point, it may be beneficial to take the main vacuum pipes outside of the landfill so they're not as subject to settlement. And that often happens at landfills. They do that after they've kind of developed the whole footprint of the landfill, and they don't want to necessarily, deal with.
Yeah, again and again and again, yeah.
So, and I think that that's something that they're considering as they move on with
Okay.
operations. Is
All
like,
right.
when does it make sense to, to consider maybe moving some of this infrastructure outside of the fill so it's not so subject to the
All
waste
right.
settling?
And then, one question and then one comment. Can the enforcement timeline be extended in the future? So, let's say there's a fail in 2 years. Does a whole enforcement have to go all over again, or it just gets addressed? Because as a citizen, I would be more interested in the maximum timeline that would have to be under enforcement for that. But halfway through, you don't say, oh, there's been a fail, we need to add on more time. This is a contract for this amount of time.
Not necessarily. It's kind of hard to answer that. It's not that black and white, really.
Okay,
So it kind of depends on the violation. So if there is a fail of some sort, we would look at like how quickly they were able to correct it. Again, because it's 4 years, they can't seek a termination of the consent order until after 4 years. So if that violation that was issued, if it was corrected and we've been able to evaluate and determine that, they're back in compliance and we have pretty good surety that they're gonna remain in compliance, then that wouldn't probably prevent us from, and at that 4-year mark, determining whether we can terminate or not. But it's really hard to predict because sometimes after you negotiate a consent order, there are things that come up that are outside the scope of the order. In this case, this is a pretty detailed, thorough order, so I don't anticipate that. But at any point, we can take another enforcement action.
I see.
So, but that being said, we'd look to what's already in here and whether we'd carry it forward. But I think based on how much detail is here, it probably would be dependent on the violation. If there was like a big fail closer to year 4, it kind of depends on the timing and what the violations are.
Yeah, it's an unfair question.
No, but honestly, I know sometimes people like to have longer enforcement orders, but I also feel like if there are future violations and they're significant, we've already been in enforcement with somebody, we're just gonna start another enforcement action.
Okay,
I mean, it doesn't mean that we can't do this again,
Right.
We would want to, just like anything else, make sure that they're correcting the violations, get them under a very robust compliance program. So, we have a lot of different enforcement tools.
great. And then the comment I have, I heard, I'm sorry.
After 4 years, we require them to demonstrate they complied with the.
So they apply to you and say,
Yes.
we
And
have
it is-
done
it is a
everything in our power.
termination By mutual consent, they request and we approve the request.
Great,
Yeah.
Great.
So if we find that they are substantially not in compliance with the consent order, we just wouldn't terminate the consent order.
I see. Thank you.
Yep.
The comment I have is earlier you were saying that You can reference current plans that you have as far as monitoring and everything that's going to be preventative in the landfill, that you can have that. Let me start again. So I just would encourage EGLE to reference the current plans that they have in place now, protecting the community, for any new permit that is granted or any permit that is continued. Because these are interpreted as costly to maintain and costly to do. So a choice on the air of money will be, we don't want that anymore. Not that we don't need that anymore, but we don't want to do that anymore. So it's just a comment that I have, that if these monitoring systems can stay in place for things in the future, that would be outstanding. So, and thank you for your time,
Yep.
and thank you for being here.
Yeah,
I
thanks for
appreciate
the
that.
comments and questions, for
Yeah,
sure.
thanks.
Young gentleman in the back coming up for his questions.
I know it's past 8 o'clock, but I'm gonna make it
No,
fast.
you're totally fine. We
I'll
said,
put a
we
little-
have time. We're good.
Probably a little different twist on the whole thing.
Okay,
I've been a resident of Kimball Township of over 80 years. I saw the blue clay come out of the ground to where that landfill is, tons and tons and tons of train cars and hauled out of there. My situation is, I guess anyway, my name is George Jackson. Was a farm boy and was in chemical engineering. I got my job at Coca-Cola making product.
secret recipe that you're not going
That
to
I
share,
can't have.
right?
That's,
Okay.
that's in the
Just
big
making sure.
tower in Atlanta, locked up.
I've seen it. I've been there. I've seen it.
Anyway, question is, we're looking at how much hydrogen sulfide's in there and methane. Are there any other gases that we're being able to record out of their levels?
Yeah, I'll answer a little bit, and
Yep.
Robert can add maybe, but, so the landfill gas, most of what's produced when the waste breaks down is methane and carbon dioxide, so that makes up, you know, close to
Plus, yeah.
98, 99% of the gas. Sometimes some air gets in there, so that's something that can be monitored for, oxygen, nitrogen. Hydrogen sulfide is one that, you know, that we know is in there and is odorous, so it's not always, you know, it's not always checked at every well, but they can sample the gas for it before it goes to the flare or the plant, because there's emission standards there. But, I mean, those are I guess, the main components of the gas, but I think there's opportunity to, you know, to sample for additional gases that are in there. So I don't know if, Robert, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, so they have to, with their flare, they have to do sampling of the hydrogen sulfide gas. Hydrogen sulfide is the main constituent within the gas, but then I think also monthly within this consent order, they're also gonna have to take that sample and send it to the lab. And when you send it to the lab, that encompasses all the sulfur compounds, so not just hydrogen sulfide. So that kind of gives us another indication of what the concentration really is when you're encompassing all the compounds. So they'll have to continue to do that, so.
The only reason I asked that question is I live 2.5 miles northwest of the landfill. Haven't had a real issue with any odors or anything there. But I've noticed this year, primarily, maybe it was because the odors were in the air, that I burn firewood, okay? Well, the smell of that smoke is different now, but I've been burning. So did that wood absorb the gases and it make the smell of smoke different? Or is the equipment they're using there, is there or the oil companies or gas companies, are they adding in something to gas that's making things, exhaust even smells different today? Might be my nose. But that's just one question on that end. To make it quick and short, on the other side.
As long as you're not burning treated wood. There's no burning of treated wood.
No, not treated wood, no. Anyway, being a farm boy for 19 years, around that area there was 9 farmers in that area. Probably 500 head of cattle, maybe 600 head of cattle. Now I maybe got 10 in that whole area. Methane had to be stronger back then than it is now at the landfill. So that's my deal there. You know, we had, my grandfather and my dad, we had horses, we had cattle, we had hogs, we had sheep, and we had chickens. So any of you that haven't been here back in those days don't realize what that smells like. So it's something you had to put up with in those days. So it's just, if they took and measured now, if that was still there and they took and went by this farm and measured it, oh, you'd have more than what you want to have there. And the big dairy farms, the beef farms up in the, farther up in the thumb there. I go by those. Yes, you get downwind, you got an issue. But I just, you know, this, yes, we want the landfill cleaned up and run properly. Will it be possible without having to shut it down? I mean, when I go by there every night, I don't smell a whole lot anymore. But I see that big mountain there, you know, and the flames going up on top of it. Every day I go by there. But I guess that's my main concern, that yesterday was yesterday. Those few of those scents were there then, and now they're there, but it's a landfill that's causing them. So which way are we going? That's the main thing. So that's all I've got. So good, thanks for coming up, doing a good job. We do have to get it squared away before somebody has a problem health-wise or anything like that, because there's all that kind of, I've even got problems in my own family that did this cause it, you know. So that's one thing you have to look at. And I know Mr. Crow there, that situation, they have issues, had issues too, so. But a lot of health situations in this area, whether they're related to landfill, we do not know.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I realize it's getting late, and I appreciate all of your patience. A couple of comments and then a couple of questions that the public sent to me that weren't able to be here. First, I just wanted to comment, Supervisor Usikowski stated that, you know, a speculation why the other commissioners weren't here. I'll offer speculation because I invited them all personally and announced it at the board meeting. I think they didn't want to come out and face the public that they polluted. So that's my speculation. I am here and I'm determined that we're not going to get further pollution. I also wanted to let the board or the EGLE know that I voted against the consent order when it was brought to the Board of Commissioners a few weeks ago. I was the only commissioner up there to do that because I didn't feel it went far enough to protect the public that I serve. Risk is part of having a landfill. We all know that. We host a landfill, but I think we need to minimize the risk. The only reason not to do so is to make more money, more profit. I find that unacceptable on the backs of the people in my district. Two things that have come to light, and this is one of the questions from the public and also my reservation with voting for that consent order. The consent order didn't address or talk about the septic bioreactor. And I've had many good conversations with Greg and with Arani, Carolyn. I appreciate those and I understand, but to me it comes down to a simple factor. If I spill 5 gallons of liquid on the floor, I can clean that up pretty easy. I can contain that pretty easy. If I spill 55 gallons of liquid on the floor, my containment problem becomes much difficult. And that's what I'm concerned with. I was told by Dr. Se-Young, the vice president of CTI, on January 28th of 2024, that the bioreactor that they add septage to, which is the current bioreactor, produces 7 times the amount of gas than a dry tomb landfill. 7 times the amount of gas. Now, however you talk about that and however efficient you are collecting that, when you actually have an issue, you have much, much more gas to deal with. You're dealing with that 55-gallon drum of liquid poisons being tossed into our community. So I'm asking this board, I'm asking EGLE to consider how the septic bioreactor can be removed. And I will not vote for a consent agreement that does not contain that measure. If it cannot be done, I'm going to keep asking why. I'm working with the state representatives. This bill was passed in 2011, I believe, by Phil Pavlov to authorize septic additions to a landfill. We're the only state in the nation that allows that, and our landfill is the only landfill that accepts such septic waste additions to the garbage. There's a reason for that. I'm an engineer, I'm all for new technology, but not on the backs of taking risk with the people in our area. So specific questions, I have two that weren't answered so far. The one I just spoke of, was revoking the RDDP and permanently banning septic additions to the landfill ever on the table during this consent order? Why or why not?
Greg, do you want to talk to
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about, you know, what our options are related to addressing the gas control issues. Like I mentioned before, you know, we did feel that it was prudent to, you know, talk to the county about suspending the septic injection for sure. I mean, you can't be doing that when there's a vacuum problem. You know, I guess as we kind of worked through the investigation and did our inspections, we were looking at, you know, what do we think we can prove the sources of, you know, this gas odors that are problematic off-site in the community. And, you know, I guess our focus ended up being on, you know, a lot of it was surrounding this area we're calling, you know, cell 8, this newest cell in the southern part of the landfill. It is part of a bioreactor permit. It has, you know, some of the infrastructure in place. But, you know, the county reported that they had not yet started any septic injection. So we were kind of thinking, you know, it was a little bit counterintuitive. Like we didn't necessarily think that was going to be the case.
But they did put 153,000 gallons of septic sludge in there, as I believe Carolyn Parker noted that in one of her inspection reports,
Yeah,
which is an activator.
No, I agree. Any kind of like wastewater sludge like that can certainly spur gas production. You know, we talked about that quite a bit, you know, whether or not that could be, you know, the reason that cell 8 had so much gas that wasn't being captured, whether that impacted the hydrogen sulfide concentrations. But at the same time, we knew that septic sludge from their receiving over the years had been buried in other bioreactor cells without any known incidents. So, I mean, we didn't know that to be, you know, a trigger for like a huge spur in gas production. And I think that as we looked at the issues with the vacuum system, there was a couple things that we thought were pretty clear, that vacuum had failed in some parts of the landfill. The most significant failure was the vacuum lines feeding cell 8 because it's the furthest from the source, and that for some reason, you know, that cell has more odorous gas because of the hydrogen sulfide content. But we couldn't really find a direct link to that main odor source to the bioreactor operations. I mean, I can't sit here and say that no gas emanates through the surface of the bioreactor cells where septic injection occurred. It's just that as part of our investigations and going on site at the landfill and trying to walk the hill and go around the perimeter, it seemed that the cell 8 area was the biggest part of the problem. We also had the landfill, you know, evaluate I guess the health of the gas collectors across the whole site. We requested that, and there were some older areas where some more traditional gas wells, areas that never had, you know, septic injection or bioreactor permits, had failed, and we thought, well, that could certainly be, you know, a problem as well. But I guess the bottom line was, in order to revoke a permit, you know, that initiates a formal legal process, and it's not to say that EGLE can't do that, but in that process, EGLE has to be able to provide a factual basis for the revocation of the permit based on, violations and evidence and facts, and usually that process ends up, having to be decided by a judge. If we revoke a permit, the company, or in this case the county, is afforded due process, and they can challenge that. And so when we do those types of actions, we want to make very sure that, we can connect the dots, and we just didn't feel like we had quite enough to say, this is definitely a problem with septic injection. But I definitely hear what people are saying tonight, that it's definitely an issue of, if you have if you're generating gas much faster because of this process, when there is a problem, it can become a problem faster when you lose vacuum.
Thank you, Greg. That helps a lot, and that's what I wanted to hear, because some of the actual commissioners on the board that I serve with, they are indicating that this consent vindicates the bioreactor, that the bioreactor wasn't part of this issue at all. And I'd just like to know, I guess you can't give a yes or no, but it sounds like I'm hearing that it does not vindicate the bioreactor.
I wouldn't say it's vindicated. We can't say that it has nothing to do with the issue. And I do think, other residents that spoke have asked, what consideration can you give when these permits come up for extension? And we're definitely going to have to take a close look at that, and we're going to definitely have to consider compliance with this order. We're definitely going to have to consider, can they justify restarting this based on, have they returned to the amount of vacuum that used to be there when the gas was under control. So, there's definitely going to have to be some additional consideration as we look at these extensions.
Very good. And I know there's indications, that's all I can say at this point, because there was a closed session on February 26th with the Board of Commissioners, so I'm not allowed to discuss publicly some of the future pathways that the county may choose with the landfill, but there's indications that septage is not off the table, and that's my concern. So I do appreciate your comments. However, I want to make it known publicly, I will not sign or agree to a consent order that does include the possibility of a bioreactor. I feel that strongly against it. I've studied this bioreactor in landfill since 2014 when I retired, and I quickly learned the issues. And then as I talked to other landfills around our state, they said, we have enough problem containing the gas we have. Dr. Se-Young, from the vice president of CTI, he told me at best their design captures 85 to 90% of the gas produced. So that tells you there's 10% at least of the gas escaping, more gas produced, more gas in the public arena. So I appreciate that. One last question. The other objection I had when I voted against the consent order acceptance by the board, the consent order stipulated to be 4 years. I would really like to see that consent order carried out for the 5 years. That would take it through the next election cycle for commissioners, which I think is going to be important in this case, and also take it out to the term of the RDDP. I know our county attorney argued against that. Obviously, more monitoring, more chances to get in trouble if you violate the rules. But I think with me at the helm, I'm going to see that we don't violate the rules the best I can. So I would appreciate if that can be taken into consideration. Those will be my public comments during the virtual meeting.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming again.
Bob, appreciate it. You may be the last person. We'll see.
Trying to be.
Oh, you were trying to be.
I
All
was
right,
trying to be.
awesome. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a little newer to the conversation. My name's Tommy Longo. I purposely waited till the end because I came with some questions, but the longer I sat here, the more I came up with. So I was kind of letting everybody else get their stuff out of their way. I'm also a resident of Wales, but I purchased a piece of property in Smiths Creek with my wife, hoping to build a house for our growing family. And shortly after that purchase is when a lot of this started happening. Being that we're not a current resident, it was kind of on the back burner. I've been on the outskirts kind of paying attention a little bit. and that's why we decided to come tonight. Some of the questions I got are, you said there was a lot of things that they were failing to do that caused this issue. Was that a matter of preventative maintenance, technician or operator rounds being missed, wrong equipment, just failing equipment, or failing equipment being ignored? I know it's kind of a lot. Some of this stuff we might have already gone over, and I apologize, but I also have some clarifying questions. Because I find it hard to believe that they're not monitoring this and that they don't have people that are supposed to be doing rounds taking numbers, and then there should be data on this. And I'm assuming that you said that data is sent to you guys, but when you guys show up for these issues, are you looking this data over? Is there a pattern where maybe somebody was pencil whipping it and this could have been noticed sooner? And all of a sudden, once you guys show up, the numbers change?
I'm just making sure that you're pausing. You want?
Yes,
response to
sorry, I know
No,
that was
you're
a
totally
lot.
fine. No, you're good. We gave you a lot, so
Maybe we
the
could
question
start
is a lot
though
too.
with,
yeah.
what, from the inspectors, what were we looking at? Cause I'm not sure, we have a lot of requirements in the order that require them to do more.
Yep.
But what they were required to do outside of the order, like when we first were looking at their data.
So probably, I guess Aaron, Arana, and Carolyn would be the best to answer those
I
questions.
asked those specifically because I know a lot of people want to know who could be, for lack of a better term, at fault, responsible, whatever. And if the people that are supposed to be performing these jobs weren't performing them properly, that's something that I would want to know if that was part of the reason that this may be even escalated to this point.
Well, you gave a laundry list of things. Could this possibly be A through Z? Yes. There's a lot of things that kind of played into that, and I think we mentioned them kind of piecemeal, where it came down to not having monitors in places they probably should be, not having the requirement to do as much monitoring as probably was needed. So there's a lot of things, like to Janine's point, when the inspectors go out. So Carolyn, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about just like when you go out to do an inspection, are there certain things that you're looking at? Arana, we, each inspector, because we're look at different things, waste, air, we're looking at different things when we go out, so we're not kind of looking at the same, but we need to have these records, we need to look at how you're doing this, and all those are checks and balances, which some of them did lead to violations. Them not doing certain things did lead to some of the violations. So you're kind of on the right track with that, but do you want to hear more about the process? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. We can do that really quickly. Like for each one of you guys, when we first started getting the complaints, what were the things that you were looking at?
Well, the first thing, when we started getting odor complaints, we went out there and drove around and did an odor survey, trying to smell any offensive odors. And some people said they would smell it in their backyards, in low ravine areas, but at that time, we really didn't smell a whole lot.
And we didn't have a lot of data, I don't think then, right? I guess there weren't like reports that we were receiving that was telling us, correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
It was first that we were getting complaints and then trying to figure out. So I don't think that there's like a lot of data and reporting that they're providing to us. They have a design plan for their gas collection and control system.
Right.
And we evaluate that when they first start, and they do their different cells, and they're doing their construction, and they're laying their pipes, and they're supposed to be pulling the gas out. But I think what happens with landfills is that they kind of fall down on their maintenance, and then things aren't working like they're supposed to, and the gas starts, we call it fugitive emissions, it starts seeping out of the ground, and then we start smelling things, but I don't know that there's a lot of.
So some of it was failed maintenance.
Yeah.
That answers that question directly.
I mean, there's certain like scans and monitoring that they're required to do by law that we would look at when we do an inspection, like what we talked about, that surface emission monitoring. Now, that's something that they have to do under federal law, also under state law, and certainly that was something we took a look at when we started getting a lot more odor complaints, is what are you finding when you're doing these scans? And they found some spots in their scans where they exceeded the methane emission standard, so they knew they had to take some action. And I think in addition, then Air Quality Division said, they had their own equipment, so they did their own scan we really wanna hone in on, you know, did they miss anything in the areas that they're not required to scan under the law, especially. Other things, like the maintenance things, like it's hard to see you can't see a buried pipe to see that it started sagging. There's not necessarily a requirement that they check vacuum every so many feet of pipe, but it would have been something that could have been done to get a quicker idea that there was a problem. So that, some of these things aren't required by law, but it doesn't mean that they can't be done proactively to find maintenance issues. Some of their older gas collector wells, not in the bioreactor areas, but the older parts of the landfill before they did that, some of them were full of water, or they were pinched off. So again, until recently, they weren't really required to check those to see if they had liquids in them that was blocking the flow of gas. Now they are under a newer state law, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't have found that out if you were looking, so.
They can do underground sonar scans. There's other equipment they can use that they could probably
Yes,
find
so-
these problems. Is it
right,
not
so
part
some
of the
things are
air?
regulatory requirements that we can review, that they have to produce at our inspections, and other things are more like, do you want to implement these best management practices for maintenance? And some of those things now are going to be in this consent order, because we've seen that, hey, if you would have this information proactively ahead of time, it would be helpful. So like some of these additional scans that we're talking about under this consent order, they're not required by law, they're above and beyond, and that's what's needed to correct the problem right now.
So you guys don't get their data unless there's a complaint, is that what?
We can ask for it, in most cases, we can ask for it anytime we want. So when we do our solid waste inspections, we have a checklist, and we'll look at, they have what's called an operating record. So anything that they're required to collect for data, they're supposed to put in this record. We can look at it while we do our inspection, we can call them up and say, produce this. So we look at, a lot of what we look at normally is like their groundwater monitoring data. We look at their prohibited waste inspections. We look at the areas that they put soil cover over. They have to keep records of all that stuff. And we can also look at like their surface monitoring for methane. That would be one that we do look at regularly.
As part of the permitting though, is there a set frequency to review this?
Not to review it, I guess there's a frequency that they have to collect data for all these things. So some things are monthly, some are quarterly, some are semi-annually. We try to look at what we think are the most, important documents when we do the inspections. So a lot of times that would be gas monitoring and liquid monitoring data. And then there are certain things that are submitted, like the geologists get the groundwater reports submitted every quarter or every 6 months, whatever schedule they're on, that do have to actually be sent to EGLE. And then we have to document our reviews on all that stuff.
I think I can
Go ahead.
probably add to that. So as far as the reporting of the data, so from January 1st through June 30th, in that time period, the data that's collected in that 6-month span, they deliver that to us on September 15th of that year. So if we began receiving the complaints on September of 2023. So the data that we looked at that was made available to us when they reported it was from January to June. And then the part that encompassed where all the complaints came in was from July 1st to December 31st. That data does not get sent to us till that following March. Now, that does not mean that we can't go there to find out what's going on, because when March 24, again, so from July 1st to December 31st of 2023, we received that data on that following March of 2024. But by then, we already knew there was an issue because we had staff out there back in September and October. So they are required to report that at least twice a year. And the other thing is when they have these issues, they're allowed up to 60 days to correct them without even telling us. They gotta put it in those reports, but they don't have to tell us unless it exceeds 60 days. So what I'm trying to say is, a lot of times we do rely on the public because we may go there and the records may look appropriate depending on the time frame. But if we get the complaints, that lets us know that something else is going on. And that's how we kind of knew what was going on here, because a lot of the complainants I talked to said that even though we got the complaints in September of '23, that the issues were going on before that. Well, we didn't know that because we didn't have any data. Staff had already been out there when everything was okay. And then now when we found out that we had the complaints, we went out there. We realized, okay, you know what? Now we're having these concentrations being higher. We come out there, we do the auditing. So we kind of rely on the public to let us know, because we had no idea this was going on until those complaints began. But the data that they send us based on the time period does help, if I'm answering your question.
But our permit requires them to report twice a year any deviations from the permit, but also requires to certify annually they have been in compliance.
And this work that we're doing with landfills and doing the surface emission monitoring, that's something that Michigan is kind of right now like a national leader on, and we're doing a lot more of these audits to see how landfills are doing their surface emission monitoring, because we're kind of checking on them, because otherwise you kind of don't know unless you do it yourself. And when a lot of this stuff was happening that fall, we had like air quality inspectors from different parts of the state. Like, we were all working on this, and enforcement was kind of on the outside, but technically we were pulling in a lot of other people to try to figure out, along with MMD, like, okay, how do we attack this? Like, what information do we need? Because a lot of this work we're doing on landfills is kind of new. So we're learning a lot as we go too, and we're working more with MMD, and the rules have changed in like the last couple of years too. So there's a lot of like improvements happening on the regulatory front when it comes to gas management that EPA and the states are learning about.
And just to elaborate that further on what Janine mentioned is, so out of the 50 states, only 4 states, Michigan is one of 4 states that is doing these auditing at the landfill. So that's pretty good that we're kind of leading the way nationally in doing that, but by being more proactive rather than being reactive when these things come up.
You had said you had a lot of questions, so let's let him ask a couple more questions,
Yep.
because it is almost gonna be.
I know, I'm
marathon.
sorry.
No, you're fine.
You said that after you received these complaints, you guys had put some air monitoring out there, correct?
Yes.
Has the data from your air monitors shown improvement?
Well, it was a limited sampling study that was done. So it wasn't monitoring long-term. It was a sampling study to determine, is there an issue? And if there is, do we need to do more? So that limited sampling study, I don't even remember. I want to say it was done for 2 60-day periods. And we didn't determine that the kind of study that we were doing, that it warranted more of what we were doing. So it wasn't like monitoring everything, that it could possibly monitor. It's very specific. We were looking for things that could cause short-term or long-term health impacts.
And they were mostly southeast of the landfill, correct?
Actually, we put them on, we had a couple different locations, and then we moved them to try to, so we could kind of capture all the different sides of the landfill to look to see what was going on.
And
So-
that's
Because
on our
I'm
website.
northwest, and when I looked up at the positions online, none of them were northwest of the landfill. And that
Right.
might have been before they were moved, I don't know, but.
Okay.
Yep, we did a couple different ones, so what's on there is, what we ended up doing. And some of the reasons why we put the monitors or the samplers, because they're samplers, not monitors, a little different terminology, where they were was because of the topography of the landfill and how weather impacts. Even though it's a small mountain, that mountain still impacts weather patterns close to the ground, which is what we wanted to look at. So we wanted to look at what were the pollutants of concern in the breathing zone. Not up here where like the wind is gonna mostly be pushing things, but where you all are breathing the air. So that's why those positions, because as a layperson, you look and you're like, well, the weather normally comes from the southwest, the wind, so why wouldn't you put one here? And it's because of that we're looking at in the breathing zone, how that like very localized weather patterns are impacted by the hill of the landfill and how it is shaped. So I hear what you're saying. I know like logically it's like, what?
Well, I was confused as to why you wouldn't just put them
yeah.
all the way around.
Right.
With that
It's
being
because
said,
we only
yeah.
had limited ones that we could use to measure the specific pollutants, and so we wanted to maximize where we were putting them, and that we did use a computer model to kind of look at what would be the best place for those to capture the highest emissions based on cell 8 and all the other kind of data.
And again, the vast majority of the complaints we received were located to the southeast of the landfill and to the northeast. So that's probably why if you said you're northwest, That's probably why they.
I have,
Yeah.
but I have friends that, I mean, they didn't file the complaints, but they were smelling it too.
Yeah.
They had similar issues. I mean, maybe they weren't the ones calling, it wasn't right in their backyard.
No, we
Some people
definitely
are closer,
considered,
but,
it wasn't like we were like, Northwest, don't care. No, it wasn't. It was based on all the other data that we had, so. And that is, Janine's right, all of that is still on
Yeah, it's on
our
the
Smiths
on the
Creek
Smiths Creek website,
website. Not theirs, but.
I
on
do-
our EGLE website.
I do think the second, or when the locations were moved, I do think one of the monitors was more, it was on
That
the west
way,
side of the
yeah.
landfill, but more in the northern area of the west side, so that one might have data that
Okay.
you'd be more interested.
now, were they only on the landfill proproperty, or did you guys put?
No, they were off the property.
Okay,
They were all off the property.
okay.
It was to be able to look at what the community is experiencing, not what's on the landfill,
Right.
because those can be very different.
Right in people's yards and.
Yep.
Okay. I guess, some people are concerned, my question is what happens after the fines, continued violations, kind of, what's the end game? I mean, I'm also concerned about the fact that this is state government and local government, it's county-owned, you guys are a state government entity, and it's just fines that we pay. I know some of it can be redistributed, put back into the community, but it still comes out of our pocket, and the part that is not redistributed is just gone to a fine that we wish we didn't have to pay. So, I mean, how long are they gonna get to play a game where we have this consent order and they violate and they get a fine, and then we get to the end and they do what they need to do, and then there's more violations, and like you said, you start it over again. And
Well,
it,
hopefully we won't have to do that, but, you know, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but my understanding is like the county has a certain pot of money for landfill operations, and that the fine will be paid from that. But I don't know, I don't work for the county and I'm not sure, but I don't know, this is probably gonna upset some people, but like, when we do enforcement, there's a fine component. It's just part of our enforcement action to create that deterrent effect, and deterrent effect just means like, you know, we wanna make sure that we send a message that this is, you know, unacceptable, like that you've gotta invest in, you know, whatever business or county or individual, you've gotta ensure that you're complying with the law. And we don't take enforcement on the vast majority of violations across the state. But in this case, with everything that the community was facing and the violations that we observed, we had to refer them to escalated enforcement, and they have to pay a penalty. So,
Can I cut in real quick?
yeah.
So if, with what he's saying, if it's cheaper to just pay the fines and fix the problem, and they just continue to do that, like, where is the end game? How do you?
Right, you know,
'cause
I'm,
that's what a lot of people do, they just
yeah,
continue to pay the
right, and
fines.
I've been doing this type of work since,
my
I don't
concern.
know, almost 26 years, and I don't have a good answer for that. I don't think this county's gonna do that, though. I mean, I can't predict the future, but I think because also as a municipality, I mean, they are, you know, obviously, there's a lot of concerning things that occurred here, but I think, hopefully that they'll be on the path to compliance. But we can't predict the future.
I just want to, are you saying that they won't fix the problem and just pay the fine? Because they'll be required to fix the problem. Is that what, that to answer your
No,
question?
So if you just continue, if they're just allowed to continue to be fined, and they pay the fine because it's cheaper, pay the fine and fix the problem.
Well, no, they gotta fix
I
the
mean, they have been
problem.
fixing-
They'll have to fix the
They
problem, yeah.
also, like, we wouldn't be here tonight, cause we're not gonna just like negotiate an agreement without knowing and having a good sense that the violator, the county, the business, whatever, is going to come back into compliance. So, I mean, they've already taken actions to correct the violations, and they're gonna continue to take actions to ensure they're in compliance, but, we wouldn't be here if we didn't feel that they were already on the path to compliance. Cause the $145,000 would not, they've already spent a significant amount of money fixing their problems, and they'll continue to spend a significant amount of money. We wouldn't have negotiated the penalty at that value, if you will, if we didn't have any good sense that they were gonna comply, cause that penalty would, obviously, we'd want it to be significantly higher, too. So, we do take into account those things, like the actions that companies or counties take to come back into compliance.
So Bob, hold on, let him get through his, if you don't mind.
I think we've kind of touched on this already a little bit, but are these fairly common landfill issues? Or is this a little bit more so than typical, or?
No, I mean, I think we've definitely had odor problems, gas emission problems at other landfills, and definitely some that have led to this kind of enforcement action. So it's not unique to Smiths Creek landfill. You know, not every landfill ends up in a consent order related to, you know, odorous gas emissions, but several have. So it's, you know, it's not totally uncommon. It's not unique to this site.
And we've talked about methane and H2S both, but we seem to talk about methane more. So this monitoring that they're gonna put in is strictly just for methane?
It is, so we were looking at, for the perimeter monitoring plan, a couple things that we are considering is, we wanna make sure that we're capturing the gas. So, there's one other perimeter monitoring system at another landfill in the state, and they're doing H2S and methane, but we've had a harder time with the capturing the H2S emissions, cause they tend to be, just based on that pollutant, they tend to like run in more narrower bands. So methane is a really good surrogate for both H2S and methane emissions. So we, in this case, are requiring the methane monitoring because we think that it will be effective at capturing both the H2S emissions and the methane. So if there is a problem at the landfill, the methane monitoring should be very effective. That's why we only required them to do the methane monitoring. But one thing about the perimeter monitoring plan is that it can be amended. So like, if there are some changes that need to happen down the road, that may be something that we consider under the consent order, because we did add language that allows us to, if we,
Like if it's not working the
yeah,
way
we can seek
intend, we can-
modifications to it.
I wouldn't mind seeing something like that. I mean, I know you say, it sounds like there's a correlation and they kind of go a little bit hand in hand, but at the same time, you can't predict, and like you said, itself can kind of create its own weather patterns and this and that, and there might be a situation where you have, you know, overabundance and it somehow travels differently or whatever the case may be. And for the people that live closer, you know, I know it can cause more acute symptoms and it can come on quick. So, I know it's something I'd like to see in there. We are getting close to the end, so don't worry. I know we've all been here a long time, but I definitely feel like this is very important because, like I said earlier, this has actually held up our plans in building, and you know, so we'd really like to try and get this figured out. Now, the St. Clair County owns it, and then CTI is an engineering group that runs it.
They don't operate it, but they do like the design, a lot of the design work. So they're like an engineering consultant. I do think the county.
And
has
Blue Water Renewables has a hand in it.
I think they
too?
run the gas to
They run the
energy
gas.
facility.
Are they responsible for any of the fines from any of
No,
this?
No, they're not involved in this enforcement action.
Okay.
No, we only are, this is related to the landfill operations. It's not related to the gas and energy plant.
So even though they're connected, they have no liability, no
There are no violations
responsibility.
associated with their part of their plant, if you will.
So their equipment, everything is up to snuff, meeting
Mhm.
permit requirements, everything, okay.
And they're required to perform testing at that plant at least once a year at minimum, so that it keeps them in line, helps keep them in line.
Okay. And then we talked earlier about the 500 ppm. At what point above 500 ppm does it become a violation?
It's not, that requirement in the federal regulations, it's a violation if you're not taking the corrective actions to address that excursion, if you will. Yeah, so it's like,
So there's not a threshold amount, there's not like if you hit this number,
it's a
you're in
violation. No, and that comes right from the Landfill Federal Clean Air Act.
That is an indication that something else is going wrong.
Yeah.
They have to figure out with the root cause analysis what is going wrong, and they have to fix that problem.
And then
until
retest, and then
then they
retest.
redo
Yep.
the SEMS monitoring, and if it is below 500, it's okay. If it is above 500, they still have to figure out what's wrong.
So it's more like corrective actions
Yeah.
and making improvements to the gas collection and control system.
And if an area fails at least 3 times within a quarter, they have to either expand the gas collection system by adding more wells, because that would mean that they're not able to capture all the methane. So you either got to expand the well field to capture that, or submit something as an alternative scenario for us to approve. So they just can't get away with it. They'll have to address it.
Now, you said they have well field. Is it strictly just gas wells, or do they have, is there liquid water wells?
You mean for,
There's
I'm just,
gas-
my
there's-
main question is, how are they monitoring water and possible contamination?
Yeah, so.
Sorry.
Yeah, no,
No,
you're
you're
okay.
fine.
So of course, there's like gas wells to collect the gas, but there's also, a system of monitoring wells. There's 15 monitoring wells, groundwater monitoring wells that surround the entire landfill. So both like hydrologically up gradient and down gradient. And then there's, chemical constituents that they test for, and then all of those results are submitted to the department and then reviewed.
I'm assuming that's a large band of chemicals.
Yeah, so this landfill in particular is, they have like site specific, so like they're looking at their leachate, site specific, inorganic indicator parameters, then we're looking at heavy metals, and then primary and secondary volatile organic compounds.
What about like plastics, PFA, stuff like that?
So like, yes, so like right now, so Smiths Creek voluntarily, did PFAS sampling back in 2019. All the results were non-detect. And if I remember correctly, they did 5 down gradient wells and 3 up gradient wells. And then at my last inspection, I was informed that earlier this month, they conducted another voluntary PFAS groundwater sampling event. So I'll be getting submitted those results.
Is this at different levels, different depths, or is it just surface?
No, so this is like groundwater. This is
Right.
the uppermost aquifer, and that occurs at 60, 70 feet below ground surface.
these are great questions. They are, they're good.
Well, I won't say where I work, but
Yeah.
I've dealt with some air permitting, and we deal with some solution
No,
mining and some
and-
Do
different
you
things.
two work
Just-
together?
I'm no expert by any means, but I have a little bit of idea. We deal with air permits and ground.
And I do want to clarify, like, as of now, like, there's no suggestion in the groundwater data that there's been any release into groundwater.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all I got. Thank you, guys.
All right,
Appreciate
no,
it.
it.
thank
We
you, Tommy,
appreciate it.
appreciate it. I would love to wrap things up unless, Bob, do you have one more thing?
Something short, I don't even need to go to the.
Okay.
Thank you all for coming. We owe you guys gratitude for getting on this. I think we'd still be breathing bad air if it wasn't for you folk. I do appreciate it. And for the people that are concerned going forward, help me. Come to the county commission meetings. They're the first Thursday, third Thursday of the month. They're available online. Help me fight for you guys in clean air, because there's still indecision as to what to do going forward. So please get involved so that we can minimize risk to our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
for coming.
Thanks, Bob. So a couple of things, I know it's almost 9 o'clock, so I'll try to be really fast. This isn't like class where
Oh,
now
shoot,
bell
yeah,
rang
that's
and you all can run out, so give me a couple more set minutes here. Just because I think it might help you going forward, so we talked about public comments, I did bring these cards, if you heard something today and you really wanna make a comment in writing today, the good thing about doing it on these cards is I get all your information that I need to make it official, and then write it on the back. So, what I like to say about public comments, and if you come next week, you'll hear the same thing, you are free to comment on anything in the consent order that you would like to. Some things are more likely to lead to changes, we talked a lot about those tonight, some things aren't. Like, you can say we wanna shut the landfill down, that's not something we're going to actually be able to do with the consent order. So just keep that in mind. So how can you submit an official comment? We have this great online portal called My Enviro Portal. If you don't like technology, don't worry about it. It's not a problem. You can also send us a letter if you'd like. You can send Jeff Rathman an email. You can write it on this. can attend the hearing next Thursday, so you have pretty much any way that you would like to submit a comment, we'll do it. We will take it on a napkin, literally doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if only Bob says the comment, or if all of you say the comment, they're all weighed the same, so a lot of times people are like, well, if we comment more, it's more likely. It's not true. We kind of look at them more singularly by topic. Where to find other information? I know Alexis, thank you for standing at the table. She's one of our newer staff, so we're really happy to bring her with us tonight. Grab stuff on your way out if you would like to. This stuff is also on our public notice page. It's also at michigan.gov/EGLE Smiths Creek. So if you're looking on the Smiths Creek webpage, we talked a lot about where those sampling pieces of information are and a lot of other just updates. Also, you will get emails from me. If you don't want to, if I send you one and you really don't want me to send you anymore, just tell me to take you off the list, it's fine. But it's a really nice way for us to kind of keep you updated on what's going on. We only put a few people on this. If you want to get a hold of somebody, Jeff Raffin, as Janine mentioned, he is our normal enforcement specialist that's on this case. He wasn't able to be here with us tonight. But if he doesn't have an answer for you, he will get it to whatever one of the panelists can help you with that. So again, we'll share this presentation out with folks probably tomorrow, just so everybody knows that. Here is your QR code for all you tech-savvy people. If you would like to attend the public meeting next Thursday, so how that's going to be, you all will be experts at it because we're going to kind of do a little bit of the similar thing. Little short presentation for folks who weren't able to be here tonight. We'll do a short Q&A. It will be limited though, so this was nice to get to talk to you for a lot longer period of time than we'll have next week. Then we'll go into the hearing, and just as a reminder, hearing comments that are on the record, it's awkward because we don't respond to you. So we just listen and we just say thank you. Then your comment is officially on the record to be considered by our enforcement staff on the final consent order. So you don't have to register ahead of time for the meeting either. If you don't want to, you can just join at the time. But you'll see most of us there again, but we'll just be on the TV instead. Also, one other thing to mention, if you or someone you know does not have the internet, doesn't have a smartphone, can't participate virtually, the township is going to be hosting a broadcast here as well. So spread the word on that. Or if you just want to come hang out with your friends again, listen to us together, you can do that. Whatever works. And I think that is the end. So I did it before 9 o'clock. So thank you guys. Seriously. We don't mind doing this. We really appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you. These questions, I was teasing you a little bit. They really were. Everybody had great questions, and we appreciate the opportunity to be able to come and have one-on-one face-to-face chat with you. So I know this is a lot out of your night. It's already dark, but it was kind of a crappy day, so I don't feel as bad.
I was just like at 8 o'clock, it was still light out. I'm like, look at that, it's almost
and then he's
June.
talking about his pool, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Usually it would be more, but not this weekend. So yeah, thank you guys, thank you everyone, and maybe see you virtually next week.
Thank you.
If you want anyone on